Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Judge LaDoris Cordell. Judge Cordell is a retired judge of the Superior Court of California. She's an author, an artist, vocalist, and pianist. Wow, that shows that judges have a life after retirement. And she is the first female African-American judge in Northern California, then the first female African-American Superior Court judge in Santa Clara County, California. And today, we will speak about her book, Her Honor, My Life on the Bench, What Works, What's Broken, and How to Change It. Judge Cordell, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much. And I look forward to our conversation.
I have to tell you that I have a hard time reading your book because as I was reading, I was doing this and holding my breath for what seemed to be like a long amount of time. And then at the end of 3 paragraphs, then I was excelling because you had me in suspense most of the time. I mean, the way that you recount cases that you were preceding is just astonishing. I used to read at one time the legal review, and there was a segment that always described the case, and I felt that I was reading those legal reviews. You've been in the bench for a long time. I wonder if we could start with you telling us about, as an African-American woman, how hard was it to get into law school?
Thank you so much for reading Her Honor and for getting exactly what I want readers to get out of this book. This book is a primer on our American legal system, and it's also a memoir because it's informed by who I am and the cases over which I presided. So when you put a primer and memoir together, you get a primoire, and that's kind of a new genre. So to answer your question about law school, so I went to Stanford Law School, and Stanford is one of the top law schools in the United States. And at the time, I was the only Black woman in my law school class. And I had this really big afro and felt, quite frankly, out of place. I was terrified, wasn't really sure that I even belonged there. So it's at the time, and we're talking about the early 1970s. At the time, there weren't many people of color, and especially women of color, that were in law schools. So I applied to several law schools once I finished college, and I went to college in Ohio, and I grew up on the East Coast, just outside of Philadelphia, and grew up in primarily a Black community. So when I ended up at Stanford, I knew that I wanted to go into the law, but I wasn't sure exactly where I would fit. And eventually that came together for me once I was in law school and taking some classes. But as far as how hard it was, I applied to many law schools. I got turned down from several. Stanford decided to admit me. And all I can say is that it was at a time when there weren't many people of color who were even applying to law schools, because it's really difficult and discouraging to apply to go to places where you don't see people who look like you. Today, you will see many, many more people of color, many more women who are in fact lawyers who have gone to law school, because more people in law schools and teaching there look like us. So when I went to Stanford, there were no professors of color and there were no women. So all the professors, all I saw were white males. So it just felt almost like a hostile environment until I began to understand more about what it meant to think like a lawyer and to learn all of this. I had no one in my family who had ever gone into the law before. So this was all new territory into which I ventured.
I wonder if you could perhaps recall some of the cases of racial or gender bias that you had to endure while you were going to law school.
Well, law school, what I saw in terms of bias, in terms of racial bias, gender bias, it wasn't blatant. I mean, so it was more subtle. One of the blatant things was, of course, not seeing anyone teaching who looked like me. That's pretty blatant. And that has changed. generally just across all law schools in this country. But while I was there, it was more just kind of the subtle things where I would hear comments occasionally from my fellow students, most of whom were white males, saying things like, they, meaning the handful of Black students that were there in my class, they're here, just because of affirmative action and really don't deserve to be here. We'd hear these comments, and there was just kind of a tension there, which made us question, well, am I here legitimately? Should I be here? And of course, the answer was yes, I'm here legitimately. And we need things like affirmative action to open those doors so that people like me can have the opportunities. We're more than qualified, but it's getting these institutions to recognize that.
That comment, I hear it still. I was speaking to a college professor not too long ago, and he was saying, well, the university is admitting people just because, new professors just because they are Black, and, they shouldn't be here. So, not much have changed. I mean, we don't maybe hear it so often nowadays, but it still is a predominant idea that there is, this racial bias.
Right. I mean, I heard when I was first appointed to the bench, and I was just 32 years old, I was appointed by then Governor Jerry Brown, comments, well, she just got appointed because she's Black. And my response to that is, I'd rather be appointed because I'm Black than not be appointed because I'm Black. So it didn't impact me. And that's how I dealt with the racist attitudes. I'm here now, deal with me. And one of the reasons I'm here is to bust the stereotypes about what it is judges look like.
Right. I just had to add this for the listeners. In your website, you have some amazing photos of when you were a young law student with your magnificent afro, and I enjoy looking at those photos. So listeners, go out and check out Judge LaDoris Cordell's website, and you will see her practically her life story there, chronologically written down with beautiful pictures.
Right. And the website is www.judgecordell.com.
Perfect. So in regards to gender bias, whether a person is a prosecutor or an attorney, I also hear that if you're a woman, you have to watch and be careful on how you speak, on how you express emotions, on what you wear. If you are a man, no one's going to critique the color of your tie. But if you're a female, you're going to be critiqued whether you use or don't use stockings.
Yeah, it's true. And my attitude was that I'm not going to be, and I say this to all people who are the first in whatever they set out to do. So if you're trans, if you're female, if you're of color and you're the first or among the first entering into a certain profession, is that no, that's going to be there. All of those biases are going to be there. But the reason we are here is to say that these biases are not going to stop us. So did I cater to all this? Well, I will tell you, initially, when I decided this was the route I wanted to go, meaning to the bench, and you'll see in these photographs that you just mentioned of me, my hair is straightened and it was shoulder length. And why did I do that? Why did I take this beautiful afro and straighten it? Because part of getting to be where we're wanting to be means we sometimes have to compromise. Did I like it? No. But once I was in a position, once I was a judge, then I could be really who I wanted to be. And you will see in these photographs how my hair went from being straightened to back to being curly, to being nappy, to being shorter. And it was about me being who I wanted to be. So unfortunately, if you're a woman, if you're the first in some of these professions, sometimes you have to compromise. But when you get to a place, and you eventually will get to a place where you don't have to do that.
As I was reading your book, I was astonished by the docket that you were facing on daily. And I was asking myself why someone in their right mind would want to be a judge. I mean, I can understand the social prestige that, oh, here's Judge so-and-so and whatever, you know, there's certain amount of respect. But when I see your day-to-day activity as a judge, I mean, yeah, I couldn't do it. I wonder how were you able to do it? For how many years? 20 years, was it?
Yes, I was on the bench for nearly 20 years. So what you've hit is really the key to this book. This book is about state trial court judges. These are what I call the people's judges, the people's court, because when anyone comes into a courtroom in the United States, in the state courts, the first person you're going to see in a black robe is a state trial court judge. So we have judges that are appellate judges that review what trial judges do, but the real work is done by the state trial court judges. And we preside over all manner of cases that affect human beings. So as you noted in the very beginning, when you were talking about the book, I presided over, trial court judges preside over all kinds of cases. So there's criminal cases, civil, where people are suing each other for money, but then there's adoptions, there's name changes. Trial court judges decide if someone who is in a locked psychiatric unit and wants to get out, gets out. Who decides that? Trial court judges. Trial court judges preside over probate, meaning people fight in court over the spoils of dead people. Someone leaves a will, they don't like what's in the will, so there's fighting. There are so many things that trial judges preside over, and most people don't know that. And to answer your question, who in their right mind would do it? People in their right mind who would do it like me are people who care about the impact of our legal system. People who are judges, trial court judges have to be people persons. If you don't like people, you should not be a trial court judge. I mean, one of a lot of the cases I presided over were jury trials. That's people who don't know much about our system, and they come into a courtroom, and sometimes for a day, sometimes for weeks or months, and they learn so much about the system. And it's the opportunity of trial court judges to educate jurors about the system. So Elaine, what I want to tell you is that there are many things that are wrong in America's legal system, many things, but the one thing that is good, and I really want to bring this home, the one thing that's good is that our legal system is based upon principles that are the best anywhere. Due process, the right against self-incrimination, the right to a jury trial, the right to have an attorney if you cannot afford one. The problem is that those principles were developed by white propertied males who did not intend for them to apply to people of color, to poor people, and to women. So the problem and where our system is broken is in the implementation of these wonderful principles. They have yet to be implemented fairly and justly for everyone. And that's one of the reasons I wrote this book. There's a chapter in the book called The Fix, where I talk about things that all of us, if you're in the legal profession or not, can do to help make this system or take it where it should be, which is applied fairly and equally to everyone.
And to your opinion, are we getting there? I mean, my impression is that yes, but I don't know any better.
I think you should give yourself more credit for knowing about where we're headed in our system, because, yeah, I mean, I would not have devoted my career, my profession to the legal system unless I believed in it. So yes, there are problems. Progress is being made. I mean, we've gone from a U.S. Supreme Court that said in 1857 in the Dred Scott case that a Black person had no right to even be in a courtroom and had no right to even be treated as a citizen of this country. I mean, we've come a long way from 1857, and yet at the same time, there's all this pushback now. The Supreme Court just heard the case that will likely overturn Roe versus Wade. And again, I'm talking about the federal courts here, but they impact all of us. And I'm very concerned about that pushback. But if you look at history of the American legal system, there is always this kind of 2 steps forward, maybe a step back, and then push 2 steps forward, a step back. And that's what I believe is going to happen and continue to happen in this country.
Well, since you mentioned this new change in the Supreme Court, I wonder, I mean, ex-President Trump says specifically, I'm going to put judges in the Supreme Court that will overthrow Roe versus Wade. I wonder if is that too much power on the side of an ex-president?
Yeah. So again, my book is focused on the state court judges, but let me just take a moment because this is a very important issue that you've raised. So ideally, you have a U.S. Supreme Court that makes rulings that eventually become the law of the land. And what has happened is that the whole principle of judicial independence is really disappearing rapidly in this country. And the concern I have is that when you have a judiciary that is no longer independent, that has become a political body, which is what I believe has happened in the U.S. Supreme Court, and not just because of Trump, it was happening even before then we lose the independence. And what's important about that? There are three branches of government that uphold our democracy in the US. It is executive branch, legislative, and the judicial. If one of those legs to the democracy, if one of those three legs gets pulled out, we lose our democracy. Democracy is fragile. And my concern is that we are heading in a direction of having the judiciary become so political that it's no longer independent, and that these justices, in my view, if Roe v. Wade is somehow overturned or pushed back on, that is, for me, the worst example of judicial activism, where they're just rogue judges who are doing what they were put there to do. And that raises one final thing. In the US, there are confirmation hearings where these candidates for the US Supreme Court are asked questions under oath. And that, in my view, has become a sham. Those justices, the recent ones, Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Bryant, they lied. They just completely lied and said, no, we wouldn't ever think about overturning Roe. We believe in precedent. They're liars. And these confirmation hearings have become shams. And we need to call them out for what they are and to take a look at not having life terms for these Supreme Court justices, maybe having term limits and having them selected perhaps in different ways, because right now our judiciary is in big trouble.
Wow. Okay. I don't want to derail too far away from your book. So I'm going to ask you a question. At the beginning of the book, you had a chapter of juvenile court, and I was astonished to find out that you were the judge and the jury. Can you tell the listeners how that works, how you have that dual role, and why it happens like that?
Sure. In most states in the United States, juvenile cases where juveniles are charged with crimes, and a juvenile is anyone up to the age, generally it's between 10 years old and up to the age of 17. Once you're 18, you're tried as an adult. But juvenile courts were set up initially because juveniles are different from adults. They're not fully formed, their brains are not fully formed. And the idea was that even if they have committed crimes, they can be redeemed, they can be worked with. So it was less punishment and more rehabilitation. That has changed in this country dramatically, where the focus has really been on punishment. And now we're seeing a turn a little bit more. So right now, in most juvenile cases in the states, there are no juries. Juveniles do not have a right to a jury trial, even those juveniles who are charged with serious crimes, with felonies. And I argue first I describe two cases that I presided over. One where a 15-year-old was charged with felony murder, a 15-year-old girl, and another case where a 15-year-old boy was tried in juvenile court for killing his brother, who was 17 years old, when they had engaged in a fight. But I end up recommending, as a result of presiding over these cases, and it's in the chapter, The Fix, that juveniles who are charged with serious crimes and tried in juvenile court, not tried as adults, that they should have the right or the option to have a jury preside over their case in juvenile court. In some states, it's an option. And I think it should be the case throughout the United States. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that juveniles are not entitled to a jury trial because the U.S. Supreme Court said judges can do a better job than juries in determining what the facts are and applying the evidence. And I write in the book, that's magical thinking. Those Supreme Court judges who wrote that decision, they never presided over juvenile court. I have, and I can tell you that I think jurors would do just fine presiding over these cases. And take, for example, if you have an 18-year-old charged with a serious crime, that 18-year-old under the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States has a right to a jury trial. But a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old, identical charge, tried in juvenile court doesn't have that right. And I don't think that's the way it should be.
Wow. You speak or it's mentioned that judges are under political influence. I mean, politicians assign them. There's, I think you talk about judges for sale. And also, I wonder how much corporate America have influence over judges. There was not too long ago an article in the Wall Street Journal that says that 700 federal cases were judged by judges that had financial interest on those companies, and 2/3 of those cases were in favor of the corporations. So
right.
I wonder how much finances influence the decision of judges.
Right. So what you just mentioned is an example of the federal system.
Right.
So I'm going to just focus on the state system because there are many, many more state trial court judges than there are federal trial court judges. So I have a chapter in the book called Judges for Sale, and it's about how judges get to be judges. So in almost every state, judges are elected. So I was appointed by the governor, but state trial court judges only serve for a term. Federal judges serve for life. So the term in California is 6 years if you're a trial court judge. When that's up, if I want to remain on the bench and my term is up, someone who's not a judge could run against me and I'd have to raise money and have a campaign. And what has happened in this country is that special moneyed interests have weighed in and pour money into campaigns to get candidates to get elected to be judges who will do their bidding, the special interest bidding. And that is turning our judiciary into politicians. Judges are not politicians. Politicians raise money by making promises to voters, saying, if you give me this money and I get elected, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for you. Judges do not make promises. In fact, I take that back. They make one promise, and that is to uphold all of the laws and to do so independently. But that's not what's in fact happening. So I write in the book about judicial races. In some states, more than $1 million for one seat, maybe on a state Supreme Court. We need to stop electing judges in the United States. We need to get the politics and special moneyed interests out. And I write in my chapter, The Fix, about what we should do. And I'll just put it out there. I want to leave it kind of as a teaser for people to look at. But I think we should have independent nominating commissions that vet people who want to be on the bench and also those who want to remain when their term is up on the bench. And that should be a very transparent process, open for all members of the public to view.
Judge Cordell, okay, so we're gonna shift gears. I wonder, okay, so you retire and you are also an author, an artist, a vocalist. By the way, I paint too, and I'm also an artist. So just to close this interview, can you tell us about life after retirement? What do you do? How do you spend your free time? I see a beautiful piano behind you, some paintings. Yeah, tell us, yeah, beautiful. Tell us about life after the bench.
Well, first, let me say that retirement has been wonderful in that I became unmuzzled as a judge. So when you're a judge, you are muzzled. You cannot go and say, oh, I don't like the 3 strikes law. You cannot do that. But once I left the bench, I was unmuzzled. And it's a wonderful feeling to be able to say exactly how I feel about things. I do want people to know in the last chapter of the book, I write about what I did after I left the bench in a way to kind of make amends and penance for decisions that I had to make and enforcing laws that I really did not believe in. So I hope people will read it because I undertook a case that just was a very interesting turn of events. So other things that I do, I am the co-founder of the African American Composer Initiative. There's a website, but if you go to my website, you can find it under, because I listed under music, where this organization, a nonprofit, promotes the music of African American composers, both living and those who have passed away. And on the specific website of the African American Composer Initiative, you can actually watch the concerts that we have given where I play the piano and I'm also a vocalist. And as far as the art, you can see all of my art, which are, it's charcoal. I see behind you, I see these gorgeous paintings. I haven't learned how to work with color. Mine are, as you can see on my wall, one of them, they're in black and white, it's charcoal, but you can see all of these. So I did my art even while I was on the bench. And in fact, there's a chapter called Bad Judges, where I write about bad judges, but I also write about something that I did that some judges thought was bad, which involved my art. So again, another teaser. Hope people will check out that chapter as well. So I love being able to do what I want to do now, unmuzzled. And my time is spent giving back. And that's one reason I wrote this book, to give back to people on whose shoulders I stand. I want people to know that on my mother's side, my great-grandmother and great-grandmother were among the enslaved in this country. And I stand on their shoulders. The fact that they lived and survived slavery and that I'm here is a reason why I believe every day, and I will leave you with this, and this is my mantra. I live by words of Alice Walker, who wrote The Color Purple. She's an activist, an author, and a poet. And the words are this: activism is my rent for living on this planet. And I say that and hope that others will pick this up. Alan, you are already doing this. So I hope that everyone will, every breath you take on this planet, use your time to be an activist, to make this planet a better place in which to live.
So you spoke about standing on the shoulders of others, and you were the first female African-American judge in Northern California. Right. I wonder nowadays how many people are standing on your shoulders. How does it look for female African-Americans in the courtroom?
Change has come dramatically, and that's because we've had governors like Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom in California, for example, who understand how important it is to have representational diversity on the bench. People of color, women, people who were public defenders and not all prosecutors, who are now wearing the robe. So in California, for example, it's no surprise to see women of color, to see Black women, Latinas on the bench presiding over cases. And if you turn on TV, I don't really like all these TV judge shows that are on TV, but it's not a surprise to see many people of color and women even on those shows. So change has come, and it's come because of people like you, people like me, who are saying it's, living, doing it by example. So I'm not just preaching. I try to do this, to live this every day. And where I am in my life, I have many more years behind me than I have ahead. So it's more important and a greater imperative to do all I can to make, especially our legal system, better, to make it the way it was intended to be, but make it for all of us.
Judge Cordell, can you tell us one more time the name of the book and where can the listeners follow the work that you do?
Sure. The name of the book is Her Honor, My Life on the Bench, What Works, What's Broken, and How to Change It. This book can be purchased on Amazon, at independent local bookstores, Barnes & Noble, and from the publisher, Celadon, Celadon, which is an imprint of Macmillan. And also, if you want any more information about the book, the easiest way, just go to my website, www.judgecordell.com, click author, and you can read everything you want about the book. And then you can look on my website to see my artwork and learn more about the music.
You have beautiful cartoons as well. I'm not gonna keep you any longer, Judge Cordell. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate the work you do with your podcast.